I've been involved with finance, developer finance and real estate investment now for 17 years. I've been based in Singapore for 30 years and 2 years in Hong Kong. So I've actually spent more than half my life living in Asia. And I'm delighted to be accompanied by Lawrence Tutt, the Asia Pacific Director for Yield Investing. Lawrence also is a long-time stay in Asia, has lived, I think, the majority of his life here in Asia. He's based in Hong Kong and dialing in from Hong Kong, and I'm based here in Singapore. So let me just give a brief overview for tonight's event. Many people have not heard about UK government-funded social housing and supported living. And it's not uncommon, especially for those living in Singapore who are familiar with HDB, or the Housing Development Board, to sometimes confuse what HDB housing is in Singapore and social housing and supported living. So for those of you who are dialing in from Singapore, I mean, HDB at the end of the day is a developer, but it's a government institution that is developing affordable property and providing a variety of different schemes and grants to help Singaporeans get on the property ladder, as real estate and property is very expensive here in Singapore. Now, in the UK, there is no government arm that is a developer. There are a variety of schemes, and we do have something called affordable housing, where developers, when they're building a development of a certain size, have to allocate a small percentage of the units to affordable housing, which is usually geared to first-time buyers, and those first-time buyers may be eligible for different financing options with a smaller deposit and a larger loan to value from a bank to help them, again, get on the property ladder. But when we talk about social housing and supported living, I'm going to leave the larger explanation to Lawrence, but in effect, the UK is a welfare state. Taxes are generally higher in the UK, and those taxes are used for social services. That could be free healthcare. It may be, in this case, free housing. And to certain people that qualify, there is actually free housing where the rent is fully subsidized by the government. And that's what we really refer to social housing and supported living. And there are many different kinds of social housing and supported living and different profiles of people that do actually qualify for that. So when it comes to the presentation tonight, Lawrence is going to be sharing two different ways that you can effectively invest into this asset class, which ultimately, if you want to invest in an asset class where the rent is funded by the government, or you want to invest and lend money to yield investing, again, who are providing properties ultimately that will be rented by the government, then you're in the right place. We're going to be sharing two different opportunities of being able to invest in a property and be the owner, own the title deeds, of which in many cases they're freehold properties. And alternatively, if you don't want to own the assets, there's another opportunity where you can actually invest by lending money to the developer and effectively getting a interest coupon return. So I'll let Lawrence share a little bit more about that as we get more into the presentation. Just a little bit on the housekeeping side of things. We will be having a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. Depending on how you've set up your screen, there should be a chat box in the bottom right-hand side. So please feel free to insert your questions into there, and we will definitely do our very best to answer those at the end of the presentation tonight. I'm just going to kick off with a little bit of macro data. Again, for those people who are not familiar with the UK property market, here we can see the average house prices in the UK going back to 2002, where it was estimated the average house price across the UK was about £120,000. Now, as we fast forward to about 2008, you'll see the biggest drop in house prices since records began, which was in the 1960s, where we saw an average drop of prices of around about 17, 18%. And that was really due to the global financial crisis, which hit real estate in many countries around the world. But we could still see that it wasn't hit as hard as many other countries' real estate markets. And really from there, when we look at this, apart from that blip during the global financial crisis, it really is a pretty straight line. And this is one of the trends typically in the UK property market. It's not a particularly volatile market, but we can see over time that it is a very steady growth. We did see in COVID where a lot of people were thinking that property prices were going to plummet around the world, but actually an acceleration in property prices. So that gives you hopefully an impression of, well, over 20 years of the predictability of the UK property market. Now, this slide, it may be a little bit difficult to see the small print in the top right-hand side, but this actually shows the percentage change in property prices in the last year in some of the major cities across the UK. Now, I'm not sure if your geography is familiar with where these cities are, but there is a very clear trend. If I was just to pull out Aberdeen, which is right down at the bottom of that list from 1 to 19, then there's a very strong trend that shows that last year, the property prices in the north of England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland performed better than those cities in the south of England. So I'm from Oxford. That was ranked at number 15. Southampton is down on the south coast, so is Portsmouth, Bournemouth. So we can see there is a general trend. And I would say that really over the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a closing of the gap between the north-south divide, that is a term that people often use. And prices of properties in the north seem to be catching up of those in the south. And here, this is the last slide I'll be talking about, but it's using Savills 5-year property price predictions based on different regions across the UK. Now, I must admit, I tend to take these projections with a little bit of pinch of salt, but, you know, these are well-paid analysts doing their very best to take a snapshot based on what they know today and trying to predict what they perceive the property price growth will be over the next 5 years. And again, what we can clearly see here is that in the north of England, the predictions over the next 5 years are quite a bit higher than in the south. So when we look at the northwest, that's the sort of Liverpool, Manchester area, that has the highest predicted property price growth of 29.4%. The northeast, which is where many of the properties that Yield Investing, the developer we have co-hosting tonight, focus a lot of their properties, and they're predicting a 28.2% capital growth. So I share this because although the developer is called Yield Investing, and they're called that because they have exceptionally strong yields, I think it's important to note that the north of England has been performing historically better in terms of capital growth and rental yields. And the next 5 years are predicted to have a stronger capital growth. And we know that the yields are very predictable with Yield Investing as well. So in many ways, you could argue to say that you've got the best of both worlds. And that's what very often when I speak with clients, they're looking for. They say, well, I want to make as much money as possible. You know, I'd like to have a property that appreciates in value and gives me a good rental yield. Well, you know, that's the best of both worlds. And I think as we go through tonight's presentation, you're going to see that the properties that we have and the kinds of investments we have and the regions of England that they're in potentially is going to give you the best of both worlds. So I'm going to now hand you over to Lawrence. Again, for those of you who've just dialed in, Lawrence is the Asia Pacific Director for Yield Investing. He's based in Hong Kong. He comes from a very strong finance background, but maybe I can let you share a little bit more detail about your background and yield investing. So over to you, Lawrence.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. Can I just confirm, is my microphone working?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Very good. Well, look, it's very nice to be here. Thank you, Richard, for the invitation to come and present and to share with everyone a little bit more about what we are doing with yield investing. My background is varied. As you can probably tell by my accent, it's not British like Richard's. I come from completely the other side of the world, down in New Zealand, which shares a lot of similarities with Britain, obviously because of the colonial past. We both are welfare states, and so when I came across yield investing, it just made sense. I always enjoy presenting to people from Singapore because the biggest issue that I find in Asia is whenever I tell people that there's such a thing as the government doing or government providing housing for people, most people in Hong Kong, China, Thailand, Vietnam, where I go, they sort of look at me with a state of disbelief because they can't believe that the government would do such a thing. I think Singaporeans, you naturally have, or people who have been exposed to it will naturally understand that in certain circumstances, the government should step in. And so I think what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit more about what the flavor of that looks like in the UK. You'll naturally be able to pick up how it is very different to what happens in Singapore. But hopefully there is some shared similarities as well, which you'll be able to pick up. Look, my background, as Richard said, is in finance. It's been slightly varied, but I ended up working for HSBC prior to joining yield investing, where I was running a mortgage desk and business development team for something called HSBC Expat, which was basically an offshore wealth management sort of arm of the business. Really enjoyed my time there, but when I came across yield investing, it sort of stuck out to me as something that was quite meaningful as well as quite rewarding. And so joined the team here about a year and a half ago. So yes, I'm based in Hong Kong. I've lived in Hong Kong for about 16 years of my life. And I mean, I've also lived in many other places across Asia on short-term stints with my career. But at the moment, Hong Kong is home. This is where my family is, and this is where I'll probably be for the next little while. So look, enough about me. But like I said, as we go through, if you have questions, please feel free to write them down. As Rich mentioned, there is that chat bot in the bottom right-hand corner, which I think you'll be able to put something in there. We'd love to get as many as possible. And also, if there's anything that we aren't able to cover, as well as if there's a level of depth that you would like to go into, then please know that the answers are there. And Rich and I would be more than happy to jump on a call with you at a later stage to go through. I'm also down in Singapore approximately once a month to meet with Rich and a range of our existing investors down there. So we can meet in person as well, if that's what you prefer, and I can buy you a coffee and we can, dig as deep as we want to go. What I'm hoping to do, and maybe what I'll do is I'll give an outline. I'll give the skeleton of what I'm going to talk through, and then we'll get stuck into the meat. So what I want to do is, first of all, start from a macro level. And the reason I start from a macro level is when you're looking at any type of investment, particularly one that is 10 to 25 years, there's an obvious question, which is that actually legitimate? If you're looking at, let's say, stocks or equities or fixed term deposits, obviously if you've got a very new type of business that you're investing in, it's sort of, you'd feel a little bit, maybe it's a bit more risky. If you're looking at government bonds, well, governments have often been around for a very long time and are predicted to continue, so you might see those as less risky. It's important to understand the social context, the macro context, the legislative context around this in order to develop a proper risk assessment of how this asset might work for you. Forgive me if I use technical words. Like I say, I worked in a wealth management business, and we were highly regulated. So you spoke in terms of risk and investor appetite and things like this. So if at any point you need me to clarify something, please write that down. And Rich has been given permission to step in if I start using acronyms and words that are not familiar for most of you. So anyway, we'll start with the social macro context. We're going to go into a little bit of the asset specific context, or asset specific, why we exist, what is the problems that we're actually trying to solve as a business, and what do those problems present as opportunities for investors. I'm going to try to address the question of why haven't you heard about this before, which is often one we get. I will go into the nuts and bolts of exactly what supported living is. What is supported living? Who are the key stakeholders in this asset class, as well as this investment from you as an investor? We'll look at things like where are the covenants, where are the cash flows, how does that piece together? Then we're going to dive into a little bit more of the granular of what are the investment options available. And so when we go through that, we'll compare what is supported living like, and what does supported living look like compared to regular buy-to-let, for example. And then we're also going to look at something else, a new sort of investment option we've brought out, which is around development finance, or a loan type product to us as a developer. At the end, like Rich said, we'll go into questions. If we need to go back, cover anything, then we can do that. So let me start immediately and just go straight in from social macro context. UK is a welfare state. It's a fact. It has been for close to 100 years. What do we mean by a welfare state? What we mean by that is a country where the citizens of that country will pay higher taxes, and those taxes are redistributed through welfare programs to people who are less fortunate than perhaps others. So New Zealand would be considered a welfare state. Australia is more of a welfare state. UK definitely is a welfare state. And another word for this would be sort of bordering towards socialist states, although that has a negative sort of connotation with it, but it is essentially around the fact that taxes are levied and they're redistributed to provide fundamental public goods. Such examples would be healthcare. In the UK, you go to hospital and it can be free. If you are going to what they call private schools or government schools, they will be free as well. And also housing for individuals who qualify. You can also get your housing paid for by the government. And so we're going to talk about what type of individuals qualify later. This is not a new phenomenon for most, and this is what surprises people. Social housing has been around since Margaret Thatcher, since World War II, in various forms and iterations, but it's the government has provided housing, whether that's for workers or for disabled people, since World War II in the UK. This is bipartisan. Doesn't matter if you're a left-leaning government or a right-leaning government, both sides of the spectrum endorse these policies. Yes, there are different flavors depending on what side of the spectrum the government is in at the time, but those two pieces of legislation you can see on the screen, the Care Act of 2014 and the Homelessness Reduction Act of 2017, both of those were passed by conservative right-leaning governments. Those are the two most recent pieces of legislation which strengthen this industry. So you're looking at an asset class which is backed by a government which has bipartisan support for this asset class. Okay, that means looking forward to the future, even when you're looking at some people have started talking to me about Nigel Farage and the potential of him coming into power or the rise of his party. Our prediction is that it won't make that much of a difference. There may be different flavors, but we'll go into that as well. The two bigger pieces of legislation there that I mentioned were the Care Act 2014 and the Homelessness Reduction Act. The main thing that they did was strengthen this asset class. And the 2017 Act, the biggest thing that did was place a 57-day timeline on the local councils, which essentially said if someone qualifies, the council has to put someone into accommodation within 57 days. That has led to an influx of capital into hotels and Airbnbs and repurposing of those towards social housing, where they are charging exorbitant rates to the local councils. And so when I talk about the first problem that we are trying to solve with what we do, is reducing the amount that councils are spending on housing. Next slide, please, Rich. I ended that by saying housing, so let's talk about housing, not just the legislative environment. So let's sidestep a little bit. In the UK at the moment, all forecasts are estimating that the UK is currently in a massive housing shortage. They need approximately 90,000 additional homes per annum to keep up with demand. And it's strange. The second sort of number here is very strange. I think in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, we don't imagine how this could exist. But in the UK, there are approximately 260,000 empty properties or abandoned. What that means is there are properties which are run down, or someone has inherited it and doesn't want to do it up, doesn't want to live in it, and they have been empty for more than 12 months. Okay. When we're talking about social housing, one of the key demographics will be people who are homeless. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean street sleepers. This can also be people who are currently experiencing financial vulnerability, go to speak to their local council and say, hey, look, I've lost my job. I'm at risk of being homeless, and they will go onto a wait list and qualify. So at the moment, that number goes up by about 140,000 last year. It's enormous. Okay. The total number of people on wait lists for social and affordable housing is 1.3 million. So what I'm going to say later is that yield investing, we're very proud of the fact that we've done 500 units with an average number of bed spaces of about 2.5, 2.6. We are barely scratching the surface in terms of us as an organization, but we're not the only players in this space. And that's, I think, why I want to answer the question around why haven't you heard of this before? And maybe this will, the next slide will talk about that. But let me just finish by saying, if you're looking at the level of government support in this space, in 2024, one type of social housing was short-term accommodation, emergency accommodation. The UK government spent 1.7 billion. Their total spend across all of their forms of social housing is 25 billion per year. It's an enormous industry. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. I want to answer the question, why haven't you heard about it? And the simple answer is that no one wanted to sell it to retail investors. That's the simple answer. Prior to us setting up yield investing, the royal we set up yield investing, our role was actually working on behalf of private equity, and we were going out and accumulating tranches of property in the realm of 50 million, 100 million, to then sell to social housing funds and REITs. And so there's some big names on the side there. I live in Hong Kong, as I mentioned, so obviously Chung Kong, CK, Li Ka-shing's property development arm. The easiest acquisition you can look at this is just look up CK Asset Management and look up Civitas PLC. They acquired that for 760 million US dollars. We put about 50 million worth of property into that fund. Into Civitas PLC, which was then acquired by Li Ka-shing. So our background was in the institutional space. This asset class is typically dominated by institutional players. The size of the space is, in 2021, was estimated at about 102 billion pounds. Okay, it has not got smaller since then. It has continued to grow. It's very, very popular as a income product, which fits into a portfolio, which gives long-term government-funded, high-yielding income. That's why a lot of these funds like it, because if you're holding an asset which is paying you anywhere from 6 up to, let's say, 10%, that's a really nice base for any sort of fund for a more stable part of their portfolio. Has a very low risk profile because it is government funded, and has a very strong regulator. The regulator for the social housing space is one of the best in the UK, if not the best. How would you measure the best? Is by the number of organizations that collapse, and it's almost negligible. And the other reason that we've seen a big interest institutionally is the ESG credentials. This is an investment which gives a measurable social impact. And so for these types of funds which are looking at triple bottom line reporting, having a portion of their portfolio allocated to this has been seen as a very attractive reason why they would want to have exposure. So we've sort of covered a little bit about the macro, the legislative. We've talked about the housing shortage and how much the government currently spends on this, how long it's been around, over close to 90 years now. 80 years, 85 years. We've also talked about the institutional interest in the space. maybe I'll diverge a little bit in this, which is why are we doing this? And this is not on the slides, but our role really is we wanted to bring this asset class to retail investors. We saw that it has a really attractive proposition, and that it is, as Rich has said, and in the emails you all got, it is long-term, it is government funded, it is inflation hedged, and it creates a nice passive hands-free income stream. About 5 years ago, our background, aside from, well, when I say some of our directors were involved in social housing, some like myself were involved in sales. We were selling off-plan properties in the UK, and sort of knew that investors living overseas, when you're in a different time zone, it can be incredibly challenging and difficult to manage a property over in the UK, even if you want that international exposure. Maybe you want some of your investment portfolio in the UK. It's a very stable, long-term market, but you don't want to be called on a Friday afternoon because the sink's broken. And so we saw this asset class as providing a really nice option, really attractive option for investors around the world, as well as investors in the UK, to have that hands-free ownership of property, and genuinely hands-free. So what is supported living? Supported living is what we specialize in. Supported living is a form of social housing. If you can imagine it like an umbrella term, it would be social housing. Underneath that umbrella, there can be a range of different housing. So, for example, affordable housing would count, refugee asylum seeker housing would count, for drug and alcohol rehabilitation would count as well. We are not those. Supported living, and we'll start at the bottom by looking at the type of tenants who live in supported living, is for people who require a low level of support to live normal lives. So what that requires is people who are financially vulnerable. What that means is people who are financially vulnerable perhaps have come on hard times, lost their jobs. There was a big upsurge in this type of property during COVID, because a lot of people lost their jobs and weren't able to make ends meet. We do tend to get a lot of people who are veterans or elderly, maybe needing an element of support, and that support is provided by a social worker. So that might be an elderly person might need 5 to 10 hours of support a week, maybe doing their groceries, going to social activities, helping them with physiotherapy and things like that. A big chunk of our tenants tend to be domestic abuse survivors, single mums with 2 or 3 kids who are fleeing from shelters or from bad situations at home. That's about 50 to 60%, I think, of our tenants are those. We really like working with those tenants because there is the mothers want to create a better life for their children, and so we know that in those situations, you're going to have a person in the property is really going to look after it and is looking to get back on their feet. So how does it work though? It's a public-private blend. It is a genuine meeting where the UK government cannot meet the need of developing all these properties themselves, so they look to the private market to provide those properties. Okay. Investors can be anyone. It could be someone who already owns a property in the UK, or maybe someone like yourselves who maybe doesn't, but is looking to purchase one of these, can buy the property, and then you will lease it, or you'll have a rental agreement on top of that to a regulated or registered social housing operator. Now, operator and housing association are interchangeable terms in this sense, so forgive me if I use either one. What those housing associations and operators do is they are in contract with the local council or the local government, and they will have a variety of different contracts for a variety of different tenures, and they will be fed referrals from the shortlists in those areas. And once the house is ready, the housing association will manage the property, manage the tenants, and also find support services for the individuals in the property. So they take full responsibility for the occupants who are in the property, and also all the repairs, all the utilities, all the void periods, and they provide that sort of holistic support for the individuals in the property. And Rich, can we just jump to the next one? This diagram sort of outlines how that flows, and if we're going to break it down really rudimentary, in a really rudimentary way, to where the cash flows, because we are talking about investment here as well. The UK central government have that budget. We talked about 25 billion spent per year. They allocate that to local councils or local authorities. Rich, what's the equivalent for a local authority in Singapore?
Yeah, so just to put it into local context, a local authority or local government would be similar to a town council here in Singapore.
Okay. So the local authority is responsible. They receive the budget. They work with referral partners, charities in the area who say, look, this, and then they maintain the wait list of people. Then they go out to the housing associations and say, we have need for this many properties because this is our long-term forecast for perhaps domestic violence or perhaps elderly people, and they use their sort of macro analysts to predict that. The housing associations will receive the payment from the local authority. They pay rent to the landlord. They manage the property and the occupants. They provide the support services, and they cover all the void periods. So you as an investor, you are in contract with the housing association. Okay, that's where your covenant is. You have a lease agreement, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the features of that lease are soon. You own the property, and you have a rental agreement on top, which I call a lease or a rental agreement. That rental agreement is what gives you the guaranteed income. And so that's where you get 100% rental payment, regardless if the property is used for 25 days of the month, 28 days of the month, you still receive 100% rent. It says 25 years of income. Some of our properties will be down to 10, anywhere from 10 to 25 years, depending on what the housing association is able to offer. And you incur no costs or management issues for the property or for the tenants for the duration of that. We probably will come back to this slide later because this is always one where people have questions. So yeah, let's jump to the next one for now, but we can come back to that. So what I want to talk about now is this. I want to talk about two ways that you can potentially invest into this sector. These are two types of products which we offer, yield investing offer, and we have done a number in both of these spaces. What I want to talk about is what each of these offer, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about how they might fit into what your appetite is as an investor. The first one on the left there is buying the actual property. So you can purchase a property. Our entry level prices are about £78,000, which, Rich, what would that be in Sing dollars?
With the exchange rate, probably about 135,000 Sing at the moment. So, you know,
Okay.
in Singapore, you could even buy your front door with that.
In Hong Kong too. I think we're two of the most expensive markets in the world. So that would be our entry level price. Now, that would be for a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay. We have a range of options up to 5-bedroom, 6-bedroom, 9. We have a 9-bedroom HMO on our availability at the moment. But you'll be buying the property. The property will be paying you 9 to 10% net yield in year one. It's fully refurbished, fully furnished, immediate rent, providing that long-term income. Okay, so I'll go into a little bit more of the details of that later. On the right-hand side, you have a separate way to come in. Which is through lending to us as a developer. Okay, so on the one on the left, you're buying the property itself. You're receiving your income from the housing association. On the right, you would be lending to us to enable us to develop more of these properties. Okay, so we've done, as I said, about 500 so far in the last 5 years. For about just over 4.5, 5 years, and we want to expand the pipeline because the demand is enormous. And in one of the cities we are in, Middlesbrough alone, the demand there there's about 2,000 people on the wait list. In Liverpool, we've just received a new contract for 200 6-bedroom HMOs. So there's a housing association there that has just won a contract to provide accommodation to homeless people, and they are able to pay out 9 to 10% net yields on 6-bed HMOs. Okay, and so that's the most efficient form of accommodation for them. Now, we want to develop.
Sorry, yes. Just to say, for people who are not familiar with HMO or that acronym, that stands for House of Multiple Occupants. So it's usually a large house that's been divided up into 5, 6 bedrooms, and you might have 5 or 6 individual occupants in that house, and hence the name House of Multiple Occupants.
Yeah.
HMO.
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. So in those type of properties, you have individual contracts with each. Well, you wouldn't, but the housing association would have individuals. This would be different to a family let. For example, a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom house where it might be mum, 2 kids. So they are considered one unit. In the HMO, you have 6 people in there. Now, I'm diverting here. The key differences between them are this: who you are investing with. On the left, you're buying the property and you're receiving that income from a housing association. On the right, you're lending to us as a developer. and you're receiving the income from us as a developer. Okay, so that's one of the key differentials. Another one is the tenure. So if you buy a property, the lease attached to it is giving you income for a really long period of time. So we 10 to 25 years. Okay. On the right, if you're lending to us, we prefer to, well, we do very short-term loans because our refurbishment process is very quick. We don't want investors to be, well, we want to offer something which is much more short-term, where you are lending directly onto a project, which we will do in 12, 16 weeks, or sometimes up to 6 months. Another way would be the security. So on the left, if you buy the property, your security is you own the property. On the right, if you're lending to us, we give what's called first charge, which is the same as a bank. If a bank was doing a mortgage, so if we default to you, you can repossess the property, just like a bank does with a mortgage. Okay. Let's dive in a little bit, and we'll go down. We'll start with the one on the left, which is what does it look like to buy one of these properties? Maybe we'll dive into that, Rich. So if you buy one of these properties, and full disclosure, all those pictures on the right are of actual properties that we have developed. Okay, they look quite nice. They definitely look better than most of the apartments I've seen in Hong Kong. And when I show people the square footage, most people laugh as well because you're looking at a 2-bedroom house which is 600 to, well, sometimes 800 square feet, which in Hong Kong is an absolute luxury. But you're buying the property. So you buy the property outright. You receive title deed with the land registry. So you are the owner in perpetuity. Okay. The property will be completely refurbished and fully furnished. And that is all inclusive in the price. There's no extra cost for that. Okay. It's also meets all minimum compliance regulations around energy performance. And for the duration of the lease, the operator has to maintain it at that standard as well. Okay. So you buy the property. But just like any investment property, who's paying the income, there has to be a rental agreement. So you have what's called a full repairs and insuring lease, or an FRI lease. This is a very common commercial lease agreement, because your commercial lease is to the, and excuse me, I've used the words interchangeably, your lease is with the housing association or the housing operator. Okay, you're not having to sign individual agreements with the occupants who are moving in and out of the property. You're signing the agreement with the housing association, and that we can be flexible in terms of tenure. Most of our rental agreements, we will do 25 years because we found people like 25 years of income. However, there are some investors who prefer a 10 plus a 10-year right of renewal, or maybe a 15 plus a 10-year right of renewal. There is complete flexibility in this case. It's really up to your preference. So you have a very long-term full repairing and insurance lease. I'll explain a little bit what that means in 2 bullet points, but let's just go to that. So what that means, if you look at the bullet point starting with operator, the operator or the housing association will manage the property for the full tenure of the lease. They pay for all repairs in the property, including gas, boilers, electrics, everything there. They do all the maintenance. If there's any tenant damages, so if the tenants break a sink or maybe a ball goes through the window because the kids are being a bit careless, the operator pays for that. All electrics, boiler, and they manage occupants. So there may be people in there for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then they will always have a continuous waiting list with the local council, where if someone moves out, maybe, let's say the mum with the 2 kids, maybe she's got a job, she's able to go back into the private market, they will have a new tenant ready to move in. They will have a new occupant ready to move in once she moves out. So that's on them to do that. There are no void periods. What I mean by void period is in between those occupants coming in and out, on a traditional property, you would not earn income. With this, you earn 100% rental income every month, regardless if there's someone in there for 20 days, 25 days, 30 days, whatever it is. It is secure and it is government funded. Okay. The income is not coming from the pockets of the occupants in the property. When an occupant moves in, they sign away their right to claim the housing benefit themselves, and the housing association claims it on their behalf. This removes the risk of that person maybe accidentally spending their housing benefit allocation on something else. It has to go towards the operator. And so that's a fundamental way that this is set up to ensure that as investors, you receive the income. I think another key feature which I find really interesting is the annual rent increase. This is based on the government policy where benefits go up by the inflation rate every year. So if the UK inflation rate was 4%, then the housing benefit goes up by 4%. So your lease agreement reflects that. In Schedule 2, it states that every year, March 31st, your rent will go up by the amount of inflation of the previous year. Okay, that provides a nice inflation hedge, which, if you're not sure what that is, it essentially means that your income retains its purchasing power over the long term. You're not going to lose value of that income stream if the rent hasn't gone up, even though cost of living has gone up. Okay, and the last one is a buyback. We do offer a buyback agreement where we will, it's optional, you don't have to sign it. If you would prefer to just take the 25 years of income, that's fine. The buyback agreement gives us the right to buy back your property for a 10% increase in value within 3 years. The buyback agreement, I prefer to go into more detail individually because it's complex to explain why we offer that. And if you would like to understand more about that, I'll let you know, and we can go to that. So look, I've listed the features, and some of these will be self-explanatory now, but if we line up side by side your traditional buy-to-let property on the private market compared to supported living, it's important to understand who needs to take care of what. Your maintenance and repairs in a buy-to-let would be you, the landlord. Or if you had a lettings agency or a property management firm, they would do it for you, and they would charge you and charge a premium on top for their service. Okay. With supported living, it's the housing association. They take care of the cost and the management, and you will never know. As in, if the window breaks, they're not going to tell you. They just repair it because that's their obligation as the tenant. In terms of finding and managing occupants, if you're the landlord, you need to go out to the market and you need to find new people for your property. You might use a lettings agency. It's fine. They will charge you for that. With supported living, who finds and manages occupants? It's the local government. The local government keeps the waiting list, and then they refer to the housing association. So the local governments have incredibly good lists of all the people in the area that are in need, and so they find them and they refer these occupants in. All certificates, building compliance, meeting all the regulations, again, you would be responsible in your traditional buy-to-let. Or in the supported living, it's the housing association again. Rental occupancy rate and the agreement length. If you own a buy-to-let property, maybe you own a student place or a student accommodation, maybe what happens in the summer when there's no students there? Well, you're not going to earn rent. Or what happens in supported living? You continue to earn rent on us because it's underpinned by government contracts. So there's no void periods in supported living, but there will be void periods if you have a buy-to-let while you're looking for a new tenant, which could be every 1 to 2 years normally. Maybe you have a really good tenant who stays for 5 or 10. So I don't want to overplay that one too much because often you do get people who want to stay in the property for a long time. But I think lastly is, where does the rent source come from? And I always laugh at this because when I first moved to Hong Kong, my first role actually was working for a charity in the Philippines, and I was doing fundraising in Hong Kong. And when I went to apply for apartments, they would always ask me, what's your job? And I understand that. The landlord wants to understand if I'm going to be able to pay the rent. And I got turned away from a lot of apartments because I was working for a charity. Simply put, they thought there's no money in that. And they might have been right. However, when 10 years later, fast forward, where I'm, a senior manager at HSBC, and then I go and look at apartments, they are all too quick to sign me up. And the reason is around the counterparty risk. If you have a buy-to-let, your counterparty risk is the tenant, who you may or may not know anything about. With supported living, your counterparty essentially is funding from the UK government, which, without going into too much depth, is very secure. So you're looking at a different level of counterparty risk in this than you are on the private market. Rich, can we jump?
Yep.
Cool. I've thrown in a couple of examples here, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. We all like to look at numbers, and so that's what we're here for as well. We're looking at investment and what are the numbers. So this is a 2-bedroom apartment we have available right now. It's Unit 2, number 3, Stranton Street, Stockton-on-Tees. This is a block that we purchased about 4 months ago, actually. We went through a complete renovation process on that. The photos you can see on the right were taken by our developer, our project manager on this build, prior to all the furnishings going in. So that's where they've obviously put down new carpets, they've put in a new kitchen, everything's wired up and ready to go. And then that is being furnished and will start hosting tenants very soon. Now, for that were 2-bedroom apartment. We would have a price of about 84,000, which I think should be about 150,000 Sing, plus or minus, Rich, based on what you said before. Now,
Yeah.
now on apartments in the UK, you can't own an apartment freehold. You have to own it leasehold, and the reason is that there's public space in the building. So the public space has to be maintained by the owner. The owner in this case is actually the Social Housing Association. So they have to maintain the public space. So you would own that for 250 years if it was an apartment. Okay. Your rental agreement is 25 years on that. Your annual rental income, or your monthly, 633. So on that, I think you're looking at about 1,000 Sing a month, more or less. Okay. There's one cost, your annual buildings insurance. So for a 2-bed apartment, your buildings insurance would be about 300 to 350. Sorry, that's a little bit outdated. The number's gone down. £350 per year. And that buildings insurance is to protect against fire, flood, terrorism, vandalism, all the acts of God in the area. For the 25 years, in the last example, or in the last slide, I talked about the inflation hedge, and I want to show you how that works. Your year one income would be £7,607. Okay. The UK at 50-year average inflation rate is approximately 2.84%. Now, compounding that inflation rate, your rent over 25 years would grow to 14,898. So your total rent on this property would be approximately 320% over the 25 years. Okay. It's not a bad return. Not a bad return at all from an income point of view. Right,
And that's purely on the rental yield. That hasn't factored in the capital growth either.
Yeah. So Stockton on Tees over the last 25 years. If you look at the land registry data and you look at the last 25 years, it's sort of gone up, it plateaued, dipped a little bit. It started creeping up again. We're starting to see a big creep in these smaller towns recently, and smaller cities recently, as we're starting to see people leave city centres. And we're starting to see people move back to the countryside, or not the countryside, but to sort of smaller places. Yeah.
So Stockton on Tees and this next one, Hartlepool, are both in the northeast of England. And if you remember the slide I was showing earlier, the northeast had the second highest projected capital growth over the next 5 years. I think it was just over 28%. So again, the properties that we're showcasing just as examples, because there are lots more, but they're all typically in the northeast of England, is in the area that has the second highest projected capital growth. And we can see how strong the yields are as well, which is showing, very predictable, clear income. This isn't speculative. This is contractual amounts. And then, of course, the icing on the cake is the increase in the capital value as well. So carry on there, Lawrence.
No, that's a really good reminder as well. So I think, let's go on to this one. This is another example of a 4-bedroom terrace house in Hartlepool, which is a little coastal city up on the northeast. So that price would be £135,000. Again, everything looks very similar, except obviously this one starts at a rental yield of 10%. So you'd be looking at earning $13,500. Now, this one is also available right now, unless it's been reserved in the last hour and a half since I updated these slides. So yes, both those units are available, and I'll show you a full list of what we have available shortly.
And with this being a terraced house, it's a freehold property, isn't it? So
correct.
Yeah. So you're actually buying a freehold.
That's important. The freehold means that you own it forever. You own this property absolutely forever, and you can pass it on to all your descendants. So how do you buy one of these? If you've never bought a property before, then this might be new. If you have, then it will look very familiar. Simply put, you choose the unit that you like or the one that meets your budget. You pay a reservation fee. £5,000. Then in the UK, you have to have a solicitor. Both sides in a transaction have to have a solicitor. We have a panel of solicitors you can choose from, quite affordable, up to very expensive if you want the white glove service. And so you need to do source of funds, you need to AML, you need to show how you've come to accumulate the money that you were putting into this. Was it your salary? Was it a gift? Is it you and your wife combining investment, let's say returns from maybe sold off some stock or whatever? Then about 6 weeks later, we would exchange contracts and funds. You sign the lease agreement, you receive the title deed, and then it starts earning income from day one. So it's a very simple process. And yeah. If we remember back on the earlier slide, I talked about buying a property, which was the option on the left. And the second one is around lending to us as a developer. So now I've sort of finished up with the buying the property, and any questions I'll take those at the end. This now is lending to us as a developer, yield investing, the company I work for. Okay. What are we looking to do? We want to purchase more properties and refurbish more properties. Partly just to increase our ability to do more and more. And how are we going to do that? Well, we need to borrow money to do that. So what are we offering? We're asking for investors who might want to consider a short-term project-specific loan. What that means is that we will bring you a list of properties that we are looking at. This is the purchase price, this is the renovation cost, and then if you're interested, you lend us the full amount. Okay. What do you get for that full amount? So we will pay 12 to 13.5% per annum. It's calculated monthly, so 1% per month to 1.1% per month. You also receive what's the maximum security on that loan. So what maximum security is we will give up the first charge of that over that property, which means that we register you with HMLR, which is Her Majesty's Land Registry Office. That's where all the titles are kept. What that maximum security means is that if we default on our ability to pay you, you have the right to force us to sell it and you recover your costs, or you can take possession. Both options are available. Now, there is not another type of lending product in the market that offers that level of security. Okay, this is extraordinary, to be honest, when we've come out with this. Another question is, well, how are we going to repay you? Because we're borrowing your money, we're buying the unit, we're refurbishing it. How do we repay? The first way we will repay is either we will then sell the unit. Okay, so that's one of the first ways we'll repay. The second way is that, and I'll dial it back, before we even start a refurbishment, we already go out and get commercial financing on indicative rates for the finished product. So all of the properties in here, we know what we can get a mortgage on once it's done. So we prefer to sell it, but if we're not going to sell it, we already have the decision in principle from a lender we have the decision in principle from a lender that if we can't sell it quickly enough, well, we'll just commercially refinance it and you'll be repaid from that equity coming out. The length of term of this in the agreement is minimum 6 months, maximum 18. However, our average project duration is 4 months at the moment. So we've done about 24 of these so far. On average, we repay the 6 months of interest in 4 months. So 1% per month, you're going to get 6% in 4 months. You can figure out the annualized on that is about 18% per year if you decided to do 3 in a row. Okay. Now, that's quite good. If I can be so frank to say myself, the level of security on this, the short-term nature of it, and the fact that we're offering a minimum, regardless, if we finish the project in 8 weeks, we will repay you the 6 months. We can't use that money for another project. We have to only use it for this specific project. That's one of the key requirements on this type of loan. It's also very easy to roll over. Once, let's say you've invested in a project, for example, this one in the middle here, this is 12 to 14 Stockton Road. This is a unit. This is 2 units that we're looking to do right now. Each of those, I think we're lending about, let me have a look at my sheet. We want to borrow just shy of 200,000 each one, so about 400,000 total to do the whole project there. If at the end of that project you said, great, I've got my interest back. It's been 4 months. I'd like to do another one. We'll bring you another project exactly the same. And you simply provide a new updated bank statement with your updated address, and you just go straight into the next one. If at the end of the project you decide, actually, I don't want to do this again, it was fun, but I'm looking for something else, you can just withdraw and you can continue. So it offers a really nice short-term option with very high yield with maximum security. This is quite remarkable. I saw there was a question in there. I can probably take this one immediately because it's specifically to this product. Kenji asked, how long does it take for ownership to be reflected on the HMLR website? It's a good question, Kenji. If you're looking at buying the actual property, once you've submitted it, once your solicitor has submitted to HMLR, there's a bit of a backlog at the moment. You'd probably looking from anywhere to 6 to 12 months, unless you paid for it to be expedited. With first charge, that doesn't get updated on the website. So that's registered with the office, and the charge would stay. At the end of the project, the charge is removed, so there wouldn't be sufficient time for it to be registered at all. Okay. Just because it takes a long time to be reflected, it doesn't mean you don't have that ownership over the property. It's just that they have a backlog. And I think anyone who's been to the UK, or even if I go to New Zealand, you start realizing after about a week how efficient it is living in Asia by how slow the government services can be in the UK and New Zealand and Australia. So we're very lucky out here. All right, let's jump into it. I'll give you an example of one of these development finance projects.
Yeah, Lawrence, just to clarify a point, just in case it was not picked up on. So basically, you're paying 1% per month for the first 12 months, but typically it's only taking on average 4 months to refurbish these properties. So, you're borrowing the money for 4 months, but actually, even though you're only borrowing the money for 4 months, you will pay a minimum of 6 months return.
Correct.
So, the actual returns could be potentially higher just because of the speed of which you can effectively renovate these properties. They're not like, 1,000 unit development. We're looking at, as we can see, individual properties that can be renovated in a few months.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so this is an example of one. This is our current lowest entry level unit. We're looking to borrow £107,000. This project is actually probably will take us about 4 months, 5 months for this one. We are converting this into a 5 times 1 bedroom apartment small block. It's going to need an entire new interior, new gas, new electric certs, new emergency lighting, fire safeties. It needs a new kitchen, needs new bathrooms, and it obviously needs to be fully furnished, ready for occupants at the end. Before we even begin the project, we've already got a lease in place, ready to go from the social housing operator or from the housing association. So we know that at the end of this, it's going to be tenanted, and then we will either sell it or we will commercially refinance it. So just to be clear, this is you lending to us. At the end of the project, you don't take ownership of it. We simply repay you the loan and the interest. Okay, so that's a good example. Now, we have a range of options at that. So maybe what we can do, Rich, is jump to, I guess, sort of how you might go about this. So if you like that, what the process looks like, this is actually a lot simpler than buying a property. Okay, you choose the project that meets how much you're looking to invest. You do source of funds, which is incredibly fast. It's a third, fourth online check. You take photos with your passports, upload bank statements, that sort of thing. At the end of that, you simply sign the loan agreement. So there's no inquiries, there's no searches, there's no, your solicitor doesn't need to go through quite as much of the background as you would on a normal property purchase. So you sign the loan agreement, you send your funds, and then your solicitor will provide you the document which gives you the security, the first charge document. And then we will provide regular progress reports. So as you go through that, once we've gutted it out, you'll see what it looks like gutted. If you're interested to see, I want to see the kitchen as it goes in, we can provide that. We can basically ping anyone on the team that's on that property and say, hey, look, can you send us a couple of updated photos, and we'll get those across to you so you can see if that's of interest to you, or maybe you don't care. You just want to earn the interest, and that's absolutely fine by us as well. So this is a very simple process. It would probably take you about a week from saying you want to do it through till the loan coming into effect. In terms of availabilities, this is our current list of availabilities. So from supported living, if you're looking to buy the properties, you can see we have a range there from right at the top, that 2-bedroom apartment I talked about at £84,000, across a range of different areas as well. You can see that we are predominantly in some areas, and this comes back to Rich's earliest point. We are able to achieve the yields we are because in the areas that we have selected, the amount that the government's paying on benefit is a really good ratio of what the property value is. And so you're sort of capturing at the sort of bottom of what's or a little flat right before this prediction for it to go up on the property values. So you're looking at really good yields on all of these units. They're in a range of places which you may or may not have heard of. The prices range from 84,000 up to 800,000. And we are currently doing about 20 to 25 of those a month. So there's a lot of ongoing projects. So at any one time, you can look at a range of different options. The development finance, again, you can see there we have a range of options too. So anything from at the bottom there, that was the Cranbourne Terrace at 107. The bulk of our stock tends to be at about 185. Now we can be flexible. If you've only got 160 or 165, it's still worth talking to us anyway. We are likely to put in some of our own capital in that as well. So we can definitely be accommodating on this development finance because it is so project specific. We'll look at that. So you're looking at really strong income numbers on the back of those there. So I want to summarize. We've started at the top. We've started very macro. We've gone to housing crisis and what the demand is. We've explained why the legislation is causing issues because it's forcing the councils to put people into expensive hotels who are charging about 150, 125 to 50 quid a night. Our property options are providing for the local councils, provide a low cost, long-term option, which we know, and it's logical, but it also is proven in studies that any vulnerable person is required for any vulnerable person who's in a short-term accommodation, whereas jumping in between locations is not able to achieve the same sort of outcomes in life as someone who's in a long-term property. They aren't able to engage in their community as well. We like doing the sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 bed properties because you're only going to have 2 or 3 of them on a street. And so we like the fact that there are these people who require support are living in and amongst the private market tenants. We hope that that creates a positive sort of social environment for them. Part of how our housing associations are rated is also on people who come into the property but then migrate out back into the private market. So they're sort of incentivized as well to help get people back on their feet. If they are able to be. So this both of these are investments that create real meaningful social impact. You are talking about some of the most vulnerable people in the UK. You're working with government programs. We have multiple investment options for this. And then it's obviously government funded, which provides a degree of stability on your investment. There's a range of short-term horizons, long-term horizons. And then can be a huge, and you're addressing a huge problem. And the huge problem is obviously 1.3 million people on the wait list who are looking for this type of accommodation. Who we are, I think I've sort of covered that a little bit, but look, we're a developer and a distributor. We also started our own housing association about 5 years ago, and we just sold it in December. It was called Secured Foundation. That housing association, we had about 300 properties in that, and we sold it to a really big family office who run about 3,000 properties, and they wanted to acquire that rent roll. We have, as a developer, we've done about 500 plus projects. And as I mentioned, prior to us setting up as a developer, and where we sort of cut our teeth was in the institutional space. So going out, working on behalf of private equity, who didn't want to go to some of these areas, but they did want to acquire really large tranches of these portfolios. And so we've done quite sizable investments in this space on behalf of private equity into social housing funds and REITs. So I think maybe one of the last things I'll say is this. This is probably quite new for a lot of you. It probably is going to take a little bit of time to get your head around, and that's okay. The answers are there to all the questions you have. We obviously can't go into all of them now, but we've got a bit of time now for some questions, so this is going to be good. And I've seen there's quite a few coming through, which is great. If you would like to have a more in-depth conversation, and if you're genuinely interested to consider this, please set up a time with Rich or myself. I'm hopefully going to be down in Singapore in the next couple of weeks. And if we can meet up for a coffee or lunch, would absolutely love to do that. And we can dive into that. What I'll say on that as well is, from our point of view as a distributor, by that I mean we don't just work with our housing association, we vet the housing associations that we work with. Some of the key things that they need to have is transparency. Housing associations don't actually need to provide audited financial accounts, but that's one of our requirements, is that they do have all their accounts on the company's house. So you can see all of the financial statements on company's house for the operators that we work with. That's an important thing we feel investors would like to see. So transparency is one, as well as operational sustainability. If you want to really dive into the nuts and bolts of how much income's coming in, how much is being paid at core rent, is this sustainable, what's this operator's government contracts, these are all available in due diligence packs. So I'm more than happy to meet up with people and go into those. Some of those I can only share. I can't send out, but I can share a screen or show you in person. But look, I think to summarize, the answers are there. These are great ethical investment options. They provide really good yield. I think, given the turmoil in the world at the moment with what we're seeing in capital markets, equity markets, I think it's wise, personally, for people to consider income products as part of their portfolio. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think it's always a good idea to have some residual passive income sort of underpinning your salary to help provide some stability just in case there's some difficult times. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to create high yielding passive income. We don't have to be called to fix a sink or a wiring at any time of day. And that's the whole ethos behind what we're doing, is looking after people, looking after vulnerable people, looking after investors, and then hopefully working with the councils to help them manage their finances better. So maybe I'll leave it at that, and we can dive into the questions.
Yeah, thank you very, very much there, Lawrence. That was certainly very informative, and I hope that hasn't been sort of information overload for those of you who may be completely new to this asset class. But I've just found, working with Yield Invest and Lawrence, if you are looking for part of your investment portfolio, to have a low risk, high yielding, inflation hedged long-term income, whereby you are also helping vulnerable people, so having a very strong ESG angle, they are phenomenal investments. So thank you again, Lawrence. Let's jump into some of the questions. I can see there's quite a few that have been written down here. We covered the first one. So Michael Chen has asked, hi, the lawyer does due diligence on me. Is there a lawyer that will do likewise on your firm and the property?
Yes.
Rights, warrants, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, you've actually got 3 questions there, so maybe I'll just go through them all. In the UK, it's a requirement that both sides of a transaction are represented by a solicitor. So your solicitor will do due diligence on us, on the contracts, on the property. They do searches, they do inquiries if you're buying that. So they will look at how they could go into as much depth as, well, if you want them to start looking at the housing association, you can do that too. So it's all within your right to do that. Within the transaction, they will provide a certain element of services. So yeah, that's absolutely. What's the expected rating on this loan? I'm not sure how to answer that because this is a private loan. What would our alternative funding sources be? So, to be completely frank, and as I say, we operate transparently, Michael, and I like that you're asking these detailed questions. We're currently doing 25 to 30 units a month. As I said, our average turnaround time is 4 months. What that means is that you can already guess we've currently got 120 units in the pipeline. Okay. Given our current profitability on each one of those, our ability to grow is hampered by our ability to reinvest from the profits from those sales. Why are we going out to, well, if I'm going to be honest, what's the alternative fund sources is we go to the bank. And so we already have bank loans out on our existing development pipeline. On that, we're probably paying anywhere from 6 to 7% on a 70% LTV on our development pipeline. Why are we paying 12%? Well, because we want to expand faster than the bank requirements will allow, given our equity exposure. So I've given you a very financial answer, but the long story short is we're giving maximum security as well as a higher level of interest because we are aware that on this loan, you are fronting up more equity, or you're fronting up more of the cost. We are not exactly always going to be as exposed ourselves. And so that's why we know we have to provide higher levels of interest and security on those. What are typical loan covenants on property at our firm, Michael? I think the best thing to do would be drop your email to Rich, and I'll send you an example of the loan agreement so you can review that yourself. And you can have a look at the HMLR charge document. You can look at the loan agreement and have a look at that. And if it looks right for you, then maybe we can have a discussion. Rich, is there another one?
Yes, so I don't know if you can see it, Lawrence, but Kenji's asking, is there fraud within the housing association or associations?
It's a good question, Kenji. I'll draw back to the earlier slide where I said that there's two earlier slides. One is why institutional investors like this. The reason is that the regulator is very strong. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't bad actors in this industry, okay? But they are few and far between. The last one we saw where there was a bad actor was about 4 years ago. They weren't necessarily a bad actor or fraudulent. They were just operating, and I think they perhaps were operating at too high a ratio of what they were paying out compared to the risk potential of the level of occupants that were coming through their property. So what I mean by that is if you're receiving £100, hypothetically, if you're in a housing association, you receive £100 of income and you're paying out £80 of income in rent. Well, what if in 1 month your occupancy goes down by 20%, right? You're now you're breaking net even because your rent is a fixed cost. Your income can be variable, or parts of that income can be variable. So it's really important to work with housing associations who run very sustainably. All of our housing associations are currently paying out about 40 to 50% of their income goes to core rent. And we will not work with housing associations who pay too much because we think that that would actually represent too risky a scenario for investors. We want investors to be able to believe that the 25-year lease agreement is possible. And so the only way to do that is to work with an operator who's actually able to pay out sustainably, consistently for 25 years. So we have our own sort of internal audit around which operators we will work with based on how they operate and how they manage their finances. So we work with about 7 operators at the moment. I can, again, feel free to drop your email. We can send you the list of operators. You can look them up yourself on Companies House and do your own due diligence to sort of see, or I can walk you through their financial statements and tell you why we work with them, as well as what regulations they meet, as well as if they have any accreditations or rubber stamps or whatever, so we can go through that. So yeah, it's a complex question, but yeah.
Lawrence, if if in the very unlikely scenario the housing association was to collapse,
yeah,
what's in place? What sort of safeguards in place, for the investor?
Right, the Care Act 2014 provides legislation around this. So in that act, what it talks about is that given that the people are wards of the state or currently there, the council still have a duty to continue to house those people. What we've seen happen, and the most obvious example was Home REIT, where there was a association that did go bust. The local council went back out to tender, found new housing association to take over the lease. That's what happened.
And is that covered in the lease agreements?
No, it's not covered in the lease agreement because your lease agreement is with the specific housing association.
Right.
But it's institutionalized in the way that the system works, that when housing associations have gone bust, which, like I say, are very few and far between, they've got the local council or the local authority or even the Department of Work and Pensions, if it was a national contract, have gone back out to market to find new housing associations to take over the lease, back pay any rent that was missed, and then continue that covenant with the property owner.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So next question from Keith. He's basically asking about the buyback within 3 years at 10%
Yeah.
capital appreciation. He's asking who's buying it, basically.
Yeah, this is where we start going really into in-depth. Who will be buying it? I'll go back to our background. So our background is selling to institutions. Okay, so what we are doing is by putting the buyback on the property, if you sign up for that, then your property becomes part of our portfolio. By that we mean it's a property which is committed to a sale if you've signed it. You don't have to, but if you have signed it, then it's committed to our portfolio, which we are then going out to institutions and asking if they want to buy 500 properties, 600 properties, which might be worth 48 million, 50 million, 80 million. And we will be looking to sell your property at a premium, and we're sharing part of that profit with you, which is where you get the 10% capital appreciation from. Now, this is something we've done 5 times before, so it's not new. The difference is this time we're working with retail investors who'd like to do this. Instead of in the past, we did it on behalf of big private equity guys out of London. So it's a little bit different this time. But yeah, that's who we're selling it. You are selling it back to us, but we will be backing all of those properties into one big tranche, which will go to an institution. But like I said, it's optional. If you actually prefer to hold this for a long period of time, then that's absolutely fine. We will continue to be looking to build these institutional exits, more of them, because I think both of us have a vested interest in that happening. So if you don't want to sell it, then don't sign the buyback. And let's say we actually are about to do our next one at the moment. We've got 3 letters of intent out at the moment from some big funds to buy our existing portfolio from investors. We've received 3 letters of intent on our current portfolio, so hopefully in the next couple of months we'll see that move. But if you haven't signed it, you could choose if you wanted to be involved in or not. So it's really up to you. We want to give you the flexibility on that one.
Great. Next question from Kelvin again. Can we get a bank loan to buy the properties, or does it have to be a cash purchase?
So we make it that it has to be a cash purchase. So you have to buy it with cash. However, you can get a bank loan after you own it. Not a problem at all. And simply put, Calvin, the reason we do that is because if you apply for this and you apply for a loan, and then at the end your loan gets declined and we're left with an asset which we would have preferred sold, we don't want the outcome of your mortgage to dictate our ability to sell property, simply put. So you can go ahead and apply for that and get all the paperwork done and start doing things, but you'll have to complete in cash.
Okay. And similar to that, can you get interest-only mortgages?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael, you can. So there's at least, I know of 2 lenders who will definitely do interest-only mortgages on these. Like I said earlier, you would have to buy the unit first. Then you can pull out up to 75% LTV. The interest rates are a little bit higher for interest-onlys, but I think you'd be looking at depends on how much you've bought. But I think the last number I got was, the quote, this was about a week and a half ago, was about 5.5% to 6.5%. Which is not bad considering that you're getting a 9 to 10% yield and you're leveraging up, you're gearing up on that. So if you gear up rightly, you can probably start moving towards 11-12% on these properties, if you choose the right property with the right LTV. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Great. So from, I think it's Joe C. Howe, who is the tenant for social housing? So maybe just clarify that again. Sometimes it's always obvious.
Sure. So your lease agreement or your rental agreement, the tenant is a housing association or a social housing operator. We work with 6 or 7 operators. Each of those operators, I haven't put the slide in, but do I have this? No, it'll take me too long to find it. The associations we work with currently run anywhere from 1,000 up to 3,000 properties at any one point in time. So these are not just small mum and pop shops. These are really large institutions with sort of rent rolls in the space of anywhere from 5 million per year up to 25 million pounds per year that they're earning in rent from the government. So most of them been going for well over a decade, some up to 26 years. So we work with very good, high reputation, or very strong reputation housing associations, and they are your lease. They're your tenant. So it's you have a commercial tenancy agreement with the housing association. The housing association, and I'm going to use this word specifically, has occupants who move in and out of the property. And those occupants are the vulnerable people, but your tenant is the housing association.
And the housing association is also effectively, managing that property as well in terms of the repairs and maintenance and so on. So, that's why I think sometimes there can be a little bit of confusion. This housing association, which in layman terms is a bit like the property management arm of the local government, is the tenant.
Yeah. Someone Feel Property asked another question there, which is any refurbishment costs? No. Again, maybe Rich, what we can do is send a copy of the lease agreement over to you so you can have a look. Again, the template lease agreement is available for all of these operators, so you can read through that. All refurbishment costs are covered by the housing association for the duration of the lease, and the property needs to be returned to you in the state it was on day one. That's standard for a full repair insurance lease. It's an FRI lease it's basically exactly the same as what you're going to get. Like I live in Hong Kong, so I always talk about Causeway Bay Rolex shops, okay? Because in Causeway Bay, there's a lot of gold stores and Rolex shops. Any commercial retail space will probably have a full repairing and insurance lease, which is where the tenant coming in has full access, but they also have to maintain everything inside the property for the duration. The landlord doesn't have to do anything. So it's very common to see this type of lease in retail and in commercial spaces. And we're just simply put, it's also common in our space as well.
Okay, next question from Michael. Why work with retail investors when there's no scale? Although that's making an assumption, I think there, Michael. Is there stress in UK private equity?
Why work with retailers? There is scale. Our current portfolio is worth 48.5 million. So I would argue that we do have scale from our current strategy that we're doing. But why do that? Simply put, it's the difference between retail market, mid-market, and insto market. I don't want to go into too much because it would be detracting from, I think, what retail investors will be wanting to do. But simply put, for a retail investor, the ability to invest 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 is achievable. For, let's say, Civitas PLC, they don't want to. They have no interest in going out and doing $100,000 deals. They have zero interest or time to do that. So what is UK PE or what is global PE doing? They buy it in tranches of 100 million, 200 million, 500 million. Okay. Why do we work with retailers? Because there's an opportunity. Simply put, there's an opportunity for us to work with retail investors like yourselves who either want to hold that long-term income or you want to become part of this exit with us. And that's a way for us to build our portfolio. But that's getting really into the corporate strategy, Michael. I have a feeling you and I would have a really good conversation over a coffee about our strategy. But yeah, Kelvin asks exit strategies.
I'm just conscious of time, so thank you
Sure.
if you're still dialed in. But Kelvin's got another question. What are the exit strategies? Can we sell the properties, say, after 10 years in the open market?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we probably end with this because it is 9:30. Exit strategy is this: you can sell the property at any time. You're not locked into the property. Okay, so you own it. You have the lease agreement. Just like any other property, if you have a tenant in there, if you sell that property, the tenant stays in there. Okay, so the lease agreement stays attached to the property for the duration of the lease. Now, that's a double-edged sword, right? From your point of view, you're getting that long-term inflation-hedged income, and that compounding effect is very powerful over 25 years. However, you may want, and this is why we offer variable lengths, you might say you want a 10 plus 10-year lease. And that's because maybe you're thinking in 10 years' time, you want the option to sell the property without the lease. So that's fine. We can be flexible to that too. You can sell this in the open market. You can sell them online. You can sell them through an agent. There's no restrictions. It's just like a normal property. Obviously, you're not going to be selling it to mum and dad and a kid who want to live in it because it's being used for social housing on the lease. You're selling it to another investor. Okay. That would be the same as any buy-to-let property, which has already got existing tenants in it though. So it's just, you've got a longer lease attached to it.
I mean, I think just to expand on that, so I always say that there are really three options. You can sell at any time. Obviously, if you're going to sell in the open market and the lease is still in place, you need to sell it, with that lease in place. You could participate in the buyback, which Yield Invest typically do every 2 to 3 years, with a 10% uplift on the price you bought it for. If you actually own a larger portfolio, potential for that uplift is even higher. But again, we'll leave that for a separate conversation. Or you can keep it for long-term income, maybe legacy planning, and have a very stable inflation hedge predictable income over the long term. So I'm just going to quickly answer almost in 1 or 2 words these last few questions. And I think
sure.
what I'd like to encourage is people that would like to continue conversations, please do reach out. You can see my contact details, email address, and we can fix up a 3-way call with myself and Lawrence. I'm just going to quickly answer some of these questions. What's the commission if you want to resell a property in the UK? It's slightly negotiable, but typically between about 1 to 2%. Ben's asking about repair of carpets, wear and tear. Basically, all costs associated with maintaining that property is by the housing association. Does the rent get to increase over the years? Absolutely. We've mentioned every year it's built into the agreement that the rent will be adjusted upwards based on inflation. There is a cap and collar on that. So the maximum increase would be at 4%. It wouldn't go down below 0. But the average inflation rate in the UK over the last 50 years is 2.84%. So that's probably the average compounded increase that you'd have year on year. So lovely. That's some very good questions, and I appreciate staying engaged. I always like to see lots of questions coming in because it does mean that there's obviously interest and the audience is engaged. I do think it's a really great asset class. I've been working with yield investing now for about 4 or 5 years, and they've consistently delivered on their promise. So again, I'd like to thank Lawrence, Asia Pacific Director for Yield Investing, for a very insightful webinar. And again, we would love to meet as many of you as possible. Lawrence comes down about once a month. I'm based here in Singapore. I travel around the region doing lots of events and meeting people. So we're very accessible in this part of the world. If you're in the UK, which I know we had a few callers booked in from the UK, I will be there from the 20th of May through to the 21st of June. So maybe you can meet up with those people there as well. Okay, Ben, I'm going to say this is the absolute last one. Isn't it that it will be very arguable because everything will look like crap after 25 years? So the need to refurbish the whole house for us. Yeah. It's continually upgraded, isn't it? It's not like at the end of 25 years, you then do some refurbishments. It has to be kept in a tenantable condition, and the housing association's guidelines or strict guidelines mean that you must keep it updated throughout the tenancy, not just at the end of the 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're not just looking at someone. You're not, the housing association are not going to buy the property and just let it go to disrepair. For multiple reasons. One, they lose their contracts with the government if there's any sort of health and safety, or if there's any fire safety issues, or if there's anything where things in disrepair, or maybe the gas is out of date, or electrics, or yes, there may be a bit of wear and tear in the carpet. There may be a little bit of wear and tear here. It's normal in any property investment, honestly, but it will meet all minimum requirements because it has to. It also meets all requirements for social housing, which it has to, and those are pretty strict, stringent in terms of what is there. Look, this is not a fancy London apartment. It's not going to be marble countertops, but it will be sufficient that at the end of the 25 years, you could either do another social housing lease if you wanted to with the same housing association or with a different one, or you could rent it in the open market and you definitely get above market rates for it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's call it a day or call it a night there. Sure. Again, thank you all very, very much for dialing in tonight. And again, you've got my contact details there. We'll be delighted to fix up some calls or meetings in the near future. Please do so with myself, ideally before I go to the UK, which is on the 19th of May, late evening. So I've got a couple of weeks whilst I'm still in town. I can still do calls whilst I'm overseas, but hopefully we'll engage with as many of you as possible over the next coming weeks. So thank you all for attending. And again, thank you, Lawrence, for your help. Thank you and good night.
Thanks all. Cheers.